Everybody say married up. Okay, now if you're single, I think there's some great nuggets that you're going to get from this message that'll still bless you. And I want to also talk to the married folk. And I like to bake, y'all. I like to eat too. And so when I bake, I like to go according to the instructions. You know how it is. You get your ingredients, your egg, your flour, your vanilla extract, and all the rest of that stuff. So one time I put all the stuff together. You know, a little pinch of salt here, and, you know, you do your little lemon zest in there to make the cake taste real good. I'm making yellow cake, of course, you understand. And so I baked the thing, and the thing is just flat as all get out. I mean, it just didn't rise at all. And then it just dawned on me, dude, you left out the baking powder. Okay, now if any of you all are bakers, then you understand that you only put a little teaspoon of baking powder in the thing, and your whole cake will rise, and it'll be nice and fluffy. But if you leave out just a little teaspoon of the leavening agent, that's what baking powder does. For those of y'all who are looking at me like, what difference does it make? Okay, so baking powder is what makes it rise. And all of a sudden, you leave this one little teaspoon out, a little bit, and it goes a long way. And what we have a lot of times in marriage is we have people who want that thing to rise to its fullness of its potential, but you left God out of the mix. And a little bit of God goes a long way within your marriage. So I want y'all to think about like this, okay? Marriage rises to its potential with God in the middle of the mix. And I want to show you guys how you incorporate God within your marriage instead of saying I do and then leaving God at the altar and then going and trying to make your marriage work by yourselves. It was never meant to be that way. In fact, as an individual, we were never meant to live life apart from God's presence. And so we're going to go back to the book of Genesis, and I'm going to show you in the scriptures how God was always meant to be in the middle of the mix to help you rise to the fullness of your potential. Okay, so in Genesis 2, verse 18, it goes and it says, and I'm reading out of the complete Jewish Bible, it says, Adonai, God said, it isn't good that the person should be alone. Okay, and I will make for him a companion suitable for helping him. Now, I want you to understand, we're going back to the very first marriage because this applies from that point on to every marriage, but this also applies to every human being, that it is not good for man to be alone. That doesn't mean that you have to get married, but it does mean that you need to do life in community with other people. Does that make sense? Okay, so for all us who say we don't need people, God just said you're wrong. Okay, so watch this. Verse 19, so from the ground, Adonai God formed every wild animal and every bird that flies in the air, and he brought them to the person to see what he would call them. So Adam is naming the animals. Basically, he's giving order to God's creation because God told him to rule and subdue the earth. So this is him living out his purpose. This is like his job. His career is to bring order to the creation that God made for him. So whatever the person or Adam would call each living creature, that was to be its name. So the person gave names to all the livestock, to the birds of the earth, to every wild animal. But for Adam, there was not found a companion suitable for him. So he's seeing like giraffe hooking up with other giraffe. He see like monkeys hooking up with monkeys and stuff. And then he looking around like, where my boo thing at? You know what I'm saying? And so he ain't got nobody, okay? And so God put him to sleep. And then while he was sleeping, he took one of his ribs, closed up the place from which he had took it with flesh. So God did like a surgery type thing here. The rib which Adonai God had taken from the person, he made a woman person. He brought her to the man person. The man person said, at last, I got a wife. Okay, this is bone from my bone and flesh from my flesh, and she's fine too. She shall be called woman. And in Hebrew, the word woman is Isha. Everybody say Isha. Okay, the Bible, for those of y'all who may not know, the Bible in the Old Testament is written in Hebrew. Okay, and so when we try to understand what the meanings of the text are, we go back to the original language. So Isha is the word for woman because she was taken out of man. And man right here is Ish. Everybody say Ish. Okay, now what's important about this is they were brought together. This is the first marriage. Okay, and this is why a man is to leave his father and mother and cleave to or stick to his wife, and they are to become one flesh. They're not the same. They're different from one another, but they are one within their union. And it's very important for us to understand this. Your spouse is not supposed to think just like you. They're supposed to be different from you. That's why they get on your nerves, okay? And so Verse 25 says, they were both naked, the man and his wife, and they were not ashamed. So within the context of their relationship, there was this, you know me for who I am. And I can see that you're different from me, but I accept you for who you are. And there's no shaming, no blaming, no dissension between us. You can be different from me, and yet we are one. Bone of bone, flesh of flesh, and in love. And this is the picture of what marriage is supposed to be. Now think about it like this. God is present in the garden. His spirit is there in the garden with Adam prior to the moment that God said it's not good for man to be alone. So God is a person. So that meant Adam had God. So he wasn't completely alone. So that meant that this word alone means he was alone in a different kind of way. And this is important because you can have God, but you still need other people. And it doesn't matter if you're single or you're married, you need to be doing life in community with other people around you. So we can't just say, oh, I'm saved, I got God, I don't need nobody else. You don't need people exactly how you need God, but you still need people. When God said it's not good for man to be alone, the word in Hebrew is tov. Everybody say tov. Okay, it is not tov for man to be alone. That word means functioning according to design. Functioning according to design. Okay, in other words, God was saying the way that I made human beings was by design. You need social connection. You need somebody to be able to look at you in your eyeballs, see you for who you are, and still love you. You need people who you can be real with, transparent with. And in particular, in marriage, you need someone to rule and subdue with. Male and female created he them in God's image and told both of them to rule and subdue the earth. Stamp my image all over the world, both man and woman ruling and reigning together. That was always God's picture from the beginning. So I want us to understand you need both God's presence and people to be healthy. You need both God's presence and people to be healthy. So Adam had a beautiful environment that he was working in. He had meaningful work that he was engaged in. He had God, and still God said it is not good for you to be alone. You need someone to empathize with you. You need someone that you can look at when you're going through a difficult time. Someone you can talk to give you counsel and wisdom so you're not living in the bubble of your own context. But that God gives each and every one of us with unique perspective and wisdom and ideas and creativity. And when we all work together, all of a sudden, the whole society benefits from the collective picture of us all manifesting God in different ways. So we're made to know and show love through family. You know, the Bible tells us that God is love. That means that if you were to put God under a microscope, so to speak, metaphorically, if you were to put him under a microscope and we were able to examine the components of God flowing through every cell of his being, every fiber of who he is unconditional love. God is love. And if we were made in his image, then that means we're at our best when we are showing love. How can you show love if you ain't got nobody to share it with? Love is an action word. It's not just an idea in your mind. It's not just something you say. Love is something that you do. It becomes the actions that express who you actually are. So what is love without the context of community? You need both God, because he gives you the picture of what love is, and then you need other people, because now you can share what you saw when you spent time with God with the other people that are around you in your life. You need both God and people. Can't be like God if you hate people. You got to love God, and if you hate people who were made in God's image, God says you're a liar. You don't love me and hate people at the same time. And then he says you can't also love people and hate me, because they were made in my image, right? So there's this collective community that happens. And this is why every relationship that we have, you to your boss, or you as the boss to your coworkers, you as siblings, you as parents to kids, kids to parents, and husband to wife, when you marry up, it is challenging because we are committing ourselves to loving somebody unconditionally, and they may be getting on your last nerve. They're different, and so they rub you the wrong way. But that's exactly what love is. Love is when you actually are dealing with and encountering someone's different, and you still are godly towards them. When you marry up, that person's differences are for your development. This is really important. Their differences are for your development. I want everybody at every campus, I want you to look at the person next to you and say, you're making me better. Come on, fine. You making me better. You making me better. I can't stand you right now, but you making me better. You know, you said something stupid on the way to church this morning, but it's okay. You're making me better, right? You know, you're making me better. Your differences are for my development, because if everything is all nice and if everybody's all likable, then I'm really not expressing love. Love is that challenging thing where you actually sacrifice a part of yourself for the greater good of someone who may not be doing the same thing back to you. I want y'all to think about differences in relationships, like the chemical reaction that happens when you take an atom of sodium, which is like a metal, and then you take some atoms of chlorine, which is a gas. When you put those two together, you actually get salt. And y'all know salt of the earth, you put that stuff on everything, don't you? Right? We love us some salt. But if you were to take sodium by itself and it didn't marry up to chlorine, right? Then what you would have is just sodium by itself. If you pour sodium on your fries, you would die. It's amazing that when these two different components come together, and one of the components sacrifices a little bit of itself, and the other component sacrifices some of itself, their differences become one, and they make something new. And that thing is palatable, it's edible, and in fact, it makes everything around it taste a little bit better. Jesus told us that we're the light of the world, we're the salt of the earth. We're better when we're together, when we don't allow our differences to divide us, and we begin to unite. It requires us to sacrifice a little bit of ourselves, which means that you're loving people. You can't love people if you don't have the glue that helps bind you together, and that is the source of love. God is the source of love. So we need God in the middle of the mix in order for us to rise to our potentials instead of falling flat due to us responding to all of our problems. The good news is that we were formed with God in the middle, and I want to show you how in the creation account in Hebrew, you'll actually see how God was always meant to be in the middle. So Genesis 2:7, it says, and God formed man dust of the ground. He formed him from the dust of the ground, right? Then you look at when he made animals, and God had formed from the dust of the ground all the beasts of the field. Now in English, when we look at verse 7, God formed man. It looks the same as when he formed animals. But actually, when you look at it in Hebrew, there's two different words. These words right here, if you look at when God formed man, Vayetzir, you see these two little red hyphens right there. Everybody say yes. Okay. When you see those two, if you look over there for animals, there's only one. The reason why there's two in Hebrew, those are actual letters. That letter is Yud. Okay. When you take Yud, Yud is a part of God's sacred name, or Yud He Vav He. We would translate that in English as Jehovah, but actually it would be said as Yahovah, right? When you add consonants in, Yud He Vav He, meaning when God formed man, he made us different from animals because he built us with the capacity to have him on the inside. You are always meant to reflect the image and likeness of God. And so you rise to your best potential when you're living life submitted with the presence of God, guiding how you talk, guiding how you walk, guiding how you live, how you forgive, what you give. When God is at the center of your life, you rise to the fullness of your potential. This is important because sometimes we don't prioritize God's presence, and as a result, we lack the power to overcome our relational problems, right? And what you have is a very strong man. You have a very strong woman, because all our women are strong, say yeah. And all our men are strong, say yeah. Okay, so what happens when you get in relationships with really strongly opinionated people, when you get people from different family backgrounds, and my family did it this way, and your family did it that way, and they begin to clash. When they clash, it creates friction, and that friction, if not tamed, it will spark a flame that will burn the relationship in the house down. And eventually, when marriages continue to fall apart, it burns society down. And I want to show you how God predicted this even in the scriptures. Are y'all ready to go deeper? Somebody like, I can't take no more. I haven't had my biscuit yet. All right, so I want you to look at this. From the beginning, why a biscuit? All right, so Genesis 2:22, the rib which Adonai, God, had taken from the person, he made a woman person, and he brought her to the man person, okay? The man person said at last, this is bone from my bones and flesh from my flesh. She shall be called woman, in Hebrew, Isha, because she was taken out of man, okay? So we read that earlier, but I want you to see what it looks like in Hebrew, of course. So I want you to look up at woman, and what you find are these two letters in red, and there's one letter that's added in the front. If you look over, it's different from man, but they share two letters in common. So this is important. Oh my gosh. From the beginning, God is like, yo, you're different from her. You're different from him, okay? But yet at the same time, you share something in common. And I want y'all to see this. These two letters that both man and woman contain, they make up the word for fire. And what God is saying is, when human beings are connected together, there's always going to be a fire. Now, when he built man and woman in marriage, there was a name change that happened with Adam, where he became Ish, she became Isha. And if you take the letter that is only in woman and take the letter that's only found in man, you put those two together down at the bottom, you have one of God's names. And that name is the consuming fire. Okay? Somebody was like, well, what's the big difference in that? God was saying in every marriage, he is to be the consuming fire that purifies your natural fire. Okay? So what does that mean practically? It means that when your fire is directed by God's ways, he empowers you to flourish. It means that if you surrender the power of your flame, your personality, your attitudes, your different ways of seeing money, your different ways of seeing how to parent, your different ways of seeing how to run a business. When you combine that, your different preferences and appetites, when you take all of that fire and you submit that flame to God, he consumes all of the impurities in your relationship. What God is saying that what is left after you submit your family to God is the best of you. He cleanses our ways. He cleanses our words and our actions. He'll take your relationship, that fire, and what he'll do is he'll make it burn with righteousness instead of unrighteousness. He'll burn away the selfishness and leave you with love. Some of y'all was like, dang, I should have had this last night. Because I said some stuff that should have been burned away. I thought some things that should have been consumed by God, but it was burning on the inside of my mind. A consuming fire can purify your marriage bed, or you can be left burning with lust for another person outside of it. The consuming fire, he literally can burn beneath a pot, like a fire that's cooking up some good food. Come on, how many of y'all like some good food now? And he's cooking up a soup, and that soup can bring nourishment to the whole family, and you can speak words that edify the family and bring life, or your tongue can be, as James calls it, set ablaze by hell itself, and your tongue can be so critical that you burn your own spouse down. Your fire can burn in a way that where God is present, and he then boosts what your passions are for one another and your love for one another, and you can be drawn to and attracted to one another in a very intense, passionate way. But without God's presence, what is left is a destructive inferno. And what we have is too many people who are right now trying to figure out how to make their marriage work, and they're frustrated. But what they have failed to remember is that God needs to be in charge of it. He needs to be first in your life, man, first in your life, woman. And when we put God first, he purifies us. And then we come together. And what happens is you have a fire that can be contained in a fireplace, and it warms the entire home, instead of a fire that has no boundaries and is burning out of control. And what we see within our country and within society is that we have a whole lot of homes that are on fire. And as a result, society is burning down. But if you want to see a great country, what you're really saying is you want to see great families. Without God's direction, we have marriages that are burning apart. And what we need is to begin to say, okay, God, we need your divine presence in the center of our homes, which means we need to prioritize God's presence. Now, I want to talk about women. All my women say, hey. Okay. I want y'all to understand when God said, I'm going to bring Isha to the man Ish, he said, I will make a helper suitable for him. This word doesn't mean that God was just sending a woman to just kind of be this subservient waitress. You know what I mean? To just come in and just whatever he wants, you're just supposed to do. That's not what he's saying. What he's saying is, because in fact, in the Bible, the same word for helper, for wife, was used to describe God himself. There are several passages of scripture that said that God was the helper of Israel. He was the helper of his people when he delivered them from Egyptian bondage and into freedom from captivity. So even God is our helper. Jesus said when the Holy Spirit comes, he will be called your helper. One who walks alongside you to aid you and help you become your best. So every wife has the ability to come alongside your husband and help him to become the best of all that God created him to be. The thing you have to realize is you are a corresponding helper. You got some fire on you. Yeah, you do. Your husband was like, man, I've been trying to tell her that for the last 10 years. This woman is spicy, okay? And so you have to understand that as a corresponding helper, you don't have to usurp authority in order to get him to hear your voice. You have power contained in you. And if you submit that power to God, understand he made you by nature a suitable helper for him. You're already on his level. Yeah, buddy, yeah, I'm getting in trouble today. So let me talk to my man. All my men say, yeah. Woman was so important that God put Adam to sleep when he was making her. And that was God's will, because man would have been getting involved like, God, change this, do that, fix this. And God was like, no, I'm going to just put that boy to sleep. I know exactly how to make woman exactly what he needs. I'm going to put all that in her. And then Adam wakes up and he's like, what's going on? God, watch this, y'all, grabs Eve. He pulls him next to her, and God is walking her to the man. And the man is looking at God the Father escorting his future bride. And God is like, don't you hurt this woman. This is my daughter. And the way that I'm lovingly leading her to you is the way that once I hand her to you, you're supposed to continue to lovingly lead her into the future. And this is the woman who you're going to rule and subdue the earth together with. Meaning a loving husband doesn't need to be domineering to his wife to get the best out of her. A loving husband respects and understands that your wife has insight, that if you would listen to it, it would actually bring you victory financially, physically, spiritually, emotionally. And that's why I'm saying, women, you have to be careful. You're close to his side. And if you abuse that side, he won't want to hear you. But if you respect and honor him, and husbands, if you lovingly lead her, then what you have is a mutual submission of sodium and chlorine, and you guys can be the salt of the earth. But that requires, this is good stuff. This is good stuff. And so what we find is, oh my gosh, this is so much I want to say this. Okay. The problem is you don't realize, because you get into these moments where your differences are exposed, you don't see eye to eye, you're not supposed to see the same because you are different. It's in you working together with the glue of love. Instead of you being mad that you ain't, she ain't seeing it your way, she's supposed to. You guys are supposed to merge together and figure out how to build together with your different perspectives. It's not about being right and wrong. It's about being unified in love and figuring out how to merge your power so that instead of trying to dominate each other, you dominate the world. Come on, y'all. That's the whole point. Let me give you a picture of this, because I want to show you this real fast. Because what the devil knows is that when you guys work together, if your focus isn't on fighting one another, your focus is on dominating him. And you begin to change society. And not only that, but what begins to be passed down to your children's children are healthy marriages that put God first. You're teaching your children how to rule and subdue in the image of God, which means that everybody who comes after you reproduces after its own kind. So you begin to stamp the earth with God-fearing, God's presence-driven leaders into this world that impact society with the very presence and nature of God, and you're driving the devil back because they're walking in the power of God's light. That's why the enemy would rather have y'all fighting each other than focused on him. Now let me show you what happened. You guys are going to crush the head of the enemy. Remember how in Ephesians, Paul said there was a mystery between Christ and the church and your marriage. It said, as Christ is the head of the church, okay, husbands, love your wives just like Jesus did, sacrificially love as the head of the family. And then wives, submit yourselves to the husband as the church, the bride, submits to Jesus, its Savior. So what it's saying is, when y'all get together, it's the same victory that Jesus gave through the cross to the church when it submitted to his lordship. And now the church can dominate the devil because we have Christ at the head as the authority, and we have the body that's mutually in agreement with his character and his will and his power. And we get to crush the head of the devil because of what Jesus did through the cross. And so long as husbands and wives are fighting each other, you don't understand that you can't crush the head of the devil when y'all trying to crush one another. But if y'all get together and submit to God's power and authority, then all of a sudden you'll rule and reign with Christ. Now let me give you a picture of it. Go back to the garden with Adam and Eve. And what did you find? Smooth talking devil comes in, looking like a Louis Vuitton purse. You know what I'm saying? He come in real smooth. That boy was talking to Eve and he was like, yo. Did God say this and did God say that? And he was like, God was like, we ain't supposed to eat it or touch it. And he was like, God just knows that y'all gonna be just like, he don't want y'all to know the real scoop. Y'all missing out on life in spite of the fact that they had everything that they needed to live off of with one another in God's presence and the garden. And some of us are so unhappy in our homes, but you don't realize everything you need to be successful and to fulfill purpose, you have it right now. And if you married up to good success and favor with God and authority to dominate the devil. And what happens is Eve has a conversation, and the Bible says that she took the forbidden fruit that she wasn't supposed to, and she ate it and gave it to her husband who was with her. Adam wasn't in some far place away from when Eve was being deceived. He was standing right there looking at his wife like she was a guinea pig. And he said there, God did say we'll die if we eat it, but maybe if she tricked, but I know what's going on, and I'm going to see what happens. Let me ask y'all a question. Can I ask y'all a question? Can I ask y'all a question? Okay. What would have happened if Eve was talking to the same devil, and that joker comes in and he's like, yo, God's lying. And Eve was like, you know what? Okay, I hear what you're saying, devil. But me and my husband, we don't make decisions apart from one another. And before we decide to grab this, let me talk to my man real quick. And then her husband, he should have been there, and he would have been like, you know what, Eve, I'm standing right here next to you, and I love you enough to cover you because I know what's right. The Bible later tells us that Adam was not deceived. He deliberately disobeyed God, which means he made a choice to allow her to act in deception when he should have stood in and been a leader and sacrificed himself like Christ sacrificed himself for the church. Oh, I'm teaching pretty good right now. And so what should have happened was Adam should have been the loving servant protector, and Eve should have been a submitted, loving wife to partner with her husband. Instead, they fall into sin because they never got together and worked together as a team. And I'm trying to tell you right now, what would have happened if they'd have paused in God's presence to get his perspective? Every last one of us are going to have a snake that's going to try to come into your garden. Ain't no new tricks. Every last one of us will have a snake that's going to try to work its way into your garden to separate your union. And if he can't separate you, he'll at least get y'all to get to a place to where y'all can't stand each other. He wants to turn children against their parents. He wants to turn parents against their children. He wants to turn y'all away from your friends. He wants to bring division. The next time a smooth-tongued devil shows up and is trying to disrupt y'all from operating in the image and likeness of God, I want y'all to pause before you escalate or pause before you withdraw. We usually have a tendency to do one or two of these things. We either start arguing with our spouse, or some of us are so tired of arguing that we just don't even engage no more and we just shut down automatically. Neither one of those is a healthy way to deal with conflict. What you should do is get into God's presence to get his perspective. Get into God's presence. Remember, you were formed to have God in the middle. And so you need to get to a place to where you say, you know what, before I say the next words out my mouth, before I make a decision to eat this fruit or not, meaning before I make a decision to spend this money, before we make this decision to send our kids to this school, before we make this decision to adopt or not, before I make this decision to actively participate in, lead a small group, whatever it is that you're going to do, get in God's presence and gain this perspective. You say, God, what are you saying? God, I know how I feel, and I really want to slap somebody right now, but before I do, God, how do you want me to see this situation? Before I retaliate because of something that they've done, let me say, God, how do I pursue peace with this person in my relationship? God, what is my part? I can't control them, and I refuse to do it anymore. I thank God for one amen in this place. I can't control them, and I won't force them to see it my way. I don't have to, but here's what I want. I got my opinion. I got my way of seeing it. I believe I'm hearing God, and I'm trying to do whatever it takes to pursue peace with you. I want peace in my house. I want peace in the garden. And I realize that my weapon is not against flesh and blood, but against the smooth-tongued devil that's trying to divide my house. And now you guys begin to play and wins as a team. You rule and subdue as Adam and Eve merged together with God in the middle of the mix. This is how we're supposed to do marriage. This is how you're supposed to do relationships. This is how we turn things around. From one marriage to another, you get a healthy church. And as you get healthy churches, you get healthy communities. As you get healthy communities, you begin to see a healthy country. And if we want to see God moving in and through us, it starts with us all making a decision to submit and surrender our lives to the Lord.